Hello, virtual JaneCon, and to all who are watching this after virtual JaneCon, hello to you too. Thanks so much for clicking on this video. I'm very excited to talk about Depression Barbie and a lot of other things. So, for those who don't know me, hi, I'm Rhonda. I'm not a YouTuber, hence the kind of amateurish production of this video. I'm doing my best. But I am a writer and I'm a TikTok content creator because videos are much easier to make on TikTok. And I write and talk about literature and popular media and culture and the relationship between those two quite a bit. I'm perhaps most importantly, for the purposes of this video, a Janeite. I love Jane Austen, and her work is often a lens through which I view popular media. So at the end of the video, I'll share a few places where you can find my other work, like my podcast, hopefully my future work. But for now, let's get into why you probably actually chose to watch this video, which once again, thank you so much. So, the summer of 2023, last summer, was described by countless think pieces that I read as something like the summer of girls or some similar moniker, noting the explosive popularity of several cultural moments designed primarily for female audiences. The most obvious and ubiquitously cited of these events were the release of the film Barbie, which made over $1 billion at the global box office, and the zeitgeist quenching world tours of Beyonce and Taylor Swift, both of which grossed, quote, similarly dizzying amounts, in the words of NPR's Bilal Qureshi. Qureshi's piece fittingly titled this phenomenon of capitalism Billion Girl Summer. So, as Qureshi points out, including both Barbie and the Taylor Swift and Beyonce tours, critical acclaim has followed each of these works. Layers of meaning are being made. They are an undeniable triumph of women's creativity and ownership. So, as Jane Austen fans, the idea of women creating and owning narratives is not novel for us, no pun intended. In both academia and in popular culture, Austen is recognized as a greatly influential figure in perceptions around women's agency and interiority in fiction. In 2023, we did get a seemingly to me unprecedented number of films that were written by, directed by, produced by, and or focused on women exploring uniquely feminine experiences and taking seriously women's concerns and internal emotions and desires and feelings, which are all often discussed as hallmarks of Jane Austen's work. So this is a non-comprehensive list of films that we could easily discuss in this conversation. Um, so the three that we are going to focus on, though, especially in the context of influence from Jane Austen, are Barbie, obviously, like that's the reason why you clicked on this video, I'm sure. And then also The Little Mermaid, because I think it provides some interesting metatextual exploration of girlhood. And then Polite Society, because it's just fantastic, but also criminally underrated. And then also the writer directors of both Barbie and Polite Society, so Greta Gerwig and Nida Manzoor, respectively, have also specifically cited Jane Austen as an influence in their work, which we will get to those citations. So those two are especially relevant when we're discussing Austen's influence on media explorations of girlhood and femininity. The Little Mermaid does not have such a direct or overt connection to Jane Austen that I know of, but it is sort of indirectly based on a work of 19th century literature that comments upon society and gender. So we're at least in the same ballpark there. So let's talk about Barbie. So, directed by Greta Gerwig, of course, screenplay by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, but he's just Ken. And based on, of course, the wildly popular global brand of Barbie by Mattel. So, my experience seeing Barbie in the theater its opening weekend, that's me on the right. I was wearing pink. Um, my experience was unfortunately kind of a novel experience for me. And I suspect for a lot of women who went to see Barbie in the theater, it was a unique experience. The only other experience that I could really compare it with would be seeing the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, its opening weekend in a theater. There was a similar feminine, safe space kind of energy there. The theater where I saw Barbie was full of women and girls waving to each other, saying "Hi, Barbie" to everyone, complimenting each other's pink outfits. It was very evident that this was a film, and not just a film, but an experience designed for and centering women and feminine people. And then, of course, we got Depression Barbie. I felt personally victimized by this bit. Um, so Depression Barbie, of course, just wears sweatpants all the time and watches the BBC's 1995 Pride and Prejudice 7 times in a row. I prefer the 2005 film, but I really feel you, Depression Barbie. I really do. So I think this reference to a Pride and Prejudice adaptation is not accidental. Like, I don't think that any specific references in art are ever just random. I think that they always have some kind of meaning, even if it's not a super deep meaning. It's always there for a reason. And Greta Gerwig has cited influence from Jane Austen years before she made Barbie in a video interview with Vogue, where she drives a golf cart around a studio lot and she answers questions. So, when asked which book most positively shaped her views of romance, Gerwig responded, "I don't know about positively, but definitely I was shaped by Jane Austen because she's Jane Austen. And it was what made me think that every guy who was a jerk was actually a super nice guy who wanted to marry me." And I think we can safely assume that she is referring to Pride and Prejudice in particular here, with Mr. Darcy as the archetype for every like guy who is a jerk but is actually super nice and wants to marry the heroine in a novel, romance or otherwise. So I would push back against the notion that this is the message Austen was actually trying to communicate in Pride and Prejudice, even if that is how a lot of readers might sort of subconsciously internalize it. But with Gerwig's familiarity with Austen established, we can now read into her work, including Barbie, an inspiration from Austen beyond this overt reference to the 1995 Pride and Prejudice. But interestingly, the Austen heroine who most directly parallels Barbie the character's journey in many ways is not Elizabeth Bennet, but Emma Woodhouse. So she's handsome, clever, and rich. She was the original Barbie before Barbie ever Barbied. Emma, like Barbie, has a dream house, a dream car or carriage, and no inducements to marry. And I broke this down in her her closet. Barbie's magical closet was actually even conceived with Cher's closet in Clueless, which is of course an adaptation of Emma, as a reference point. And much like Emma, Barbie has everything she thinks she could ever want, but there is a lot that she has yet to learn and experience. So this would not be complete without a Venn diagram. I'd like to point out that my virtual JaneCon presentation from last year had a Venn diagram with Emma and Kendall Roy from Succession. So this is just the other side of Emma's personality, her two sides of her personality are Barbie and Kendall Roy. I think that's factual. So the commonalities here that they are both handsome and clever have very little to distress or vex them at the beginning of the story, of course. None of the usual inducements to marry, and they both, of course, have an incredible wardrobe. So the only differences here are that Emma is noted as being rich, and it is evidenced by the text that she is rich. But for Barbie, there does not appear to be any money in Barbie Land. I don't know how the economy of Barbie Land works. Maybe they're like it's a barter economy, or just everybody, has everything they need without a need to buy it. I don't know. I don't know. But there doesn't appear to be any money in Barbie Land, so I don't know that we can really say that Barbie is rich, but that's, kind of a technicality. So I'm probably overthinking this. So Barbie is overtly a story about becoming aware of and resisting patriarchal systems. And Emma, like all of Austen's work, also pushes against the confines of the patriarchal society that its heroine is trapped in, but does so, of course, more subtly. Most Austen heroines' journeys have the looming presence of marriage as a necessity, even a necessary evil in some cases, for women to have any measure of security or power within late 18th and early 19th century English society. But Emma is the only unmarried daughter of a wealthy gentleman. So she has the privilege of not requiring a husband to secure her financial or social well being. So, as she states to Harriet at a certain point, when Harriet asks why she isn't married, I have none of the usual inducements of women to marry. Were I to fall in love, indeed, it would be a different thing. But I never have been in love. It is not my way or my nature, and I do not think I ever shall. And without love, I am sure I should be a fool to change such a situation as mine. Fortune I do not want. Employment I do not want. Consequence I do not want. So, in this passage, Emma is demonstrating that despite her position, she's not unaware of the plight of women who are less privileged than herself. She realizes that most women will never have financial security or societal respect, or at least not the level of those things to be comfortable without marriage. And she seems to lend equal weight to those motivations for marriage as she does to the only factor that she claims would influence her to marry, which is love. And also, I think important to note is her assertion that falling in love is not, quote, her way or her nature, which has led a lot of modern readers to interpret Emma's sexuality as somewhere on the aromantic, asexual spectrum, which is an interpretation that a lot of viewers have also inferred of the character of Barbie. It's very clear that Barbie is not interested in romance with Ken. So whether she isn't interested in romance at all, or it's just Ken that she doesn't know, that she doesn't want, we don't know. But her story very obviously develops without a romantic pairing being part of the conclusion. And with Emma, she does end the story in a romantic pairing, but when we're looking at her story as a parallel to Barbie, there's a few reasons why that happens. So we have the practical reason, which is that Jane Austen had to write it this way for the book to be published. Emma, despite her expressed disinterest in marriage, has to marry within the context of her narrative. So I personally can kind of imagine a scenario where Jane Austen is thinking, okay, so I have to have her get married, but I'm going to do it my own way. That's not going to be the focus because it's not. Emma is not a romance, it's a heroine's journey. And then I can also Jane Austen imagining, thinking, the guy that she marries is going to be this guy who, on paper, is not really that obvious of a choice, right? Like, if you read the novel, um, like he's presented as just like he's kind of old and she's known him forever. He's a family friend. And then he's also like kind of antagonistic and condescending toward her a lot of the time. And like he's just kind of there. In the book, they don't really seem to have any romantic tension if you don't already know that they're going to end up together. In adaptations, it's a different story. I think adaptations tend to plant that seed much earlier on, as they should, honestly. But in the book, you don't really get that sense. Like he's just kind of there and they just sort of end up together. So Emma choosing to marry, I think, can also be read as her choosing to accept her role in society and in the world, and to a degree, exercising independence, even as she gives up some independence to take on the role of a wife. Even though Emma is much more privileged than most women of her time, marriage is still going to afford her a little bit more freedom and power within this society than she had previously. It's also significant that Mr. Knightley gives up some of his own independence by moving into Emma's home. So he's moving into the Barbie dream house instead of Emma having to move into his Mojo Dojo Casa house, aka Donwell Abbey. And Barbie also chooses to join the real world, sort of like Emma chooses to acknowledge the reality of women's position within the society. So Barbie chooses to become human, become a part of humanity, even though that means subjecting herself to a patriarchal society. She would have retained a lot more privilege by staying in Barbie land, but she chooses to give that up in order to be able to create her own narrative. I guess she tells Barbara Handler, her creator, she doesn't want to just be an idea. She wants to be someone who has ideas and makes them reality. So, in the end, Barbie and Emma both basically choose to live with patriarchy because that is the reality of the human world. So, do with that what you will. But let's move on to The Little Mermaid. So, 2023 Little Mermaid, which is directed by Rob Marshall, the screenplay by David McGee, based on the fairy tale The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, and of course, Disney's animated 1989 The Little Mermaid, with a screenplay by Ron Clements and John Musker. So, the live action remake of The Little Mermaid functions as a meta exploration of girlhood and nostalgia and coming of age, especially for those of us whose girlhoods were shaped by the 1989 film. The animated film is, of course, based on the 1837 story by Hans Christian Andersen, though with some major changes, particularly to the story's ending. And much like the Barbie film, interestingly, the 2023 Little Mermaid came to us with a very long and complicated history and relationship with culture. Anderson is believed to have been queer, and the original story is often discussed in the context of queer literature and read as a possible trans allegory, though none of this context is really carried over overtly into either of the Disney iterations. Walt Disney had first planned an animated short inspired by The Little Mermaid in the 1930s, but didn't end up making it. But when asked about how he chose stories for his films, he was quoted as saying, "I look for a story with heart. It should be a simple story with characters the audience can really care about. They've got to have a rooting interest." So Hans Christian Andersen's stories tend to feature protagonists who feel out of place in the world and whose journeys involve a conflict between some aspect of their physical being and expectations of the society that they find themselves in. Some of his most well-known stories include The Ugly Duckling, Thumbelina, The Princess and the Pea, all of which have some kind of physical obstacle for their protagonists. And then also The Snow Queen, which of course inspired another iconic Disney film in Frozen. And much like Disney's The Little Mermaid, Frozen changes aspects of Anderson's original story, but in even more radical ways by making the titular Snow Queen, who is the villain in the original, a co-protagonist. Elsa's alienation from her society is directly related to her physical being, specifically her magical abilities, which actually puts her directly in line with many of Anderson's other protagonists. I think we also see an influence from Frozen and other 2010s Disney princess films in the 2023 Little Mermaid, almost as much as from the 1989 animated film that it's primarily based on. So Disney's live action remake project and also many of its original films from the last decade and a half or so have all sort of been in conversation in sort of a meta textual way with pop culture and its relationship with classic Disney princess films, especially with how those older movies, like from the 90s and earlier, portray female agency and the interiority of their female protagonists. The 2017 Beauty and the Beast remake, for example, had been criticized for its seeming direct acknowledgement of the sort of girl boss, BuzzFeed feminist critiques of the 1991 animated film, and acknowledging those sort of bad faith critiques in the text of the film itself was seen as sort of missing the point of what a fairy tale is supposed to do. But by the time the live action Little Mermaid was in production, I think there was sort of a backlash to the backlash. And so with the 2023 film, we got a more earnest and unironic focus on the romanticized fairy tale aspects of the 1989 movie, with an emphasis on the romance and exploring the character of Prince Eric a bit more as well, than we really get in the animated film. And though the story retains the animated film's deviations in plot from Anderson's original, it also delves a bit deeper into themes from the original 1837 story of this sense of alienation and Ariel feeling like she doesn't belong in the world that she wants to be a part of because of her physical differences from humans. And it taps into those themes from Anderson's story that we can see as universal. So, in the words of this great article from Bustle, the themes of Anderson's story are universal: the longing of an outsider who wants to belong, the importance of speaking with one's own voice, and the dream, however distant, of one day finding a happy ending with or without a prince. And I think that sentiment, with or without a prince, is really applies to the works of Jane Austen as well, because those are not happy endings because the heroines get married. They're happy endings because the heroines find their voice. In The Little Mermaid, we have this idea of a love story between two people from different worlds. And that's, of course, famously exemplified in Pride and Prejudice. The the barriers between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy are social and economic rather than physical. But in both of these stories, in both of these romances, we have the concept of outside worldly forces keeping the two lovers apart. Both heroines' journeys are about retaining their innate identities and sense of self while also having clear expectations and desires of what they want in life. Elizabeth declares that she will not marry without love, and Ariel wants to live in the human world. Like, those are their goals at the outset. And both of these protagonists do not compromise on what they want. Elizabeth refuses multiple marriage proposals because she doesn't love the person proposing to her, regardless of the social and economic pressures that she is facing to get married. And Ariel sacrifices her voice, something of great value to her, and goes against the pressures of her own society and of her family to pursue her desire of being part of the human world. And it's interesting, both Ariel and Barbie come from outside of the human world and choose to join humanity, and both Elizabeth and Emma express reluctance to get married under their current circumstances, and yet they also end up getting married. It's interesting. Um, Again, do with that what you will. So finally, let's talk about Polite Society. So, directed by Nida Manzoor with a screenplay by Manzoor. It's original. It's not based on any existing story, but as we'll discuss a little bit further, she was influenced by a lot of previous works that she drew inspiration from and put into this story. So, Polite Society explores the bond between two sisters through comedy and fantastical stylized action sequences. Our protagonist is younger sister Ria, who dreams of becoming a film stunt performer. She posts her videos of her stunts on her YouTube channel, and she often has these vivid daydreams where she performs like stunning martial arts with antagonistic combatants. There's a bully in school that she fights through one of these fantastical sequences. Though, to be fair, it's never actually made clear whether these sequences are diegetic in the world of the film or not, or so they may not actually be daydreams. Um, but there is an element of fantasy to it for sure. But a rift forms between Ria and her older sister Lena when Lena decides to give up on her dream of going to art school and instead marry a wealthy and handsome doctor that her family approves of. And Ria sees Lena's decision as a betrayal of their shared ideals. And in a confrontation that eventually turns into a physical fight, Ria claims that Lena is doing a Jane Austen. So I might have a quibble with the notion that marrying a rich man to solve all of your problems is doing a Jane Austen, which of course that's stated from Ria's perspective and not necessarily that of Manzoor herself. But this is a very funny line. I screeched loudly when I heard it for the first time while watching the movie in my living room. Like I mentioned earlier, an overt reference to anything is intentional, but especially Jane Austen is, what perks my ears up. Because I take this as hard evidence of Austenian inspiration. So, as previously alluded to, Manzoor spoke in an interview with Entertainment Weekly about her influences for Polite Society. She cited Bollywood cinema, Jackie Chan's martial arts, action films, and Jordan Peele's surrealist horror. She also named Jane Austen. She said, "There is something in the way she explores the pressure of society and being a woman who wants to strike out on her own." So once we're viewing Polite Society through this Austen lens, we can see possible Austen parallels in a lot of the characters and storylines. Like, is Lena sort of an Elizabeth Bennet? She's intelligent and independent. So is her fiance Salim, who by all appearances is kind and understanding despite his wealth and Lady Catherine-esque mother. Is he sort of like a more well-adjusted and sociable Mr. Darcy, perhaps? Or is this a Sense and Sensibility story with two sisters of opposite temperaments who need to learn to find balance and better understand each other's perspectives? Or could it also be a variation on themes in Northanger Abbey with Ria's overactive imagination possibly leading her to unfounded conclusions, but that actually turn out to have some truth to them? Spoilers for Polite Society and Northanger Abbey, an over 200-year-old book. So it's a little bit of all of these, but I think the most intriguing and innovative Austen parallel is manifested in a more general sense, and the film's focus on Ria's pushing against the restrictions and expectations placed on her by various forces. These fantastical action sequences externalize the tension that Rhea is feeling internally. And this is a tension that's not unlike what we might often find brewing under the surface for Jane Austen heroines. As Manzoor noted in that same Entertainment Weekly interview, when you're a teenage girl, everything can feel so intense. It is almost violent. I wanted to ask why action hadn't been used to explore the experience of being a teenager on screen, since there is so much pain to express. And Manzoor, like Gerwig, gives her characters modes of self expression and overt agency that were essentially unavailable to Austen's heroines. But the tension that Rhea feels, the pain and confusion of being a teenage girl that she experiences, would 100% be familiar to an Austen heroine, especially those who are still teenagers, and especially to one Marianne Dashwood. So, Marianne definitely feels the intensity and violence of emotions that Mansoor is describing. In the first chapter of Sense and Sensibility, the narrator tells us that Marianne, she was sensible and clever, but eager in everything. Her sorrows, her joys could have no moderation. She was generous, amiable, interesting. She was everything but prudent. So when the novel opens, Marianne has just lost her father, and the narrator aligns us with her mother in temperament and in their experience of their grief, noting that they encouraged each other now in the violence of their affliction. The agony of grief, which overpowered them at first, was voluntarily renewed, was sought for, was created again and again. And this passage leads the reader to see the violence of Marianne's emotions as partly self inflicted, or at least self perpetuated. Much later in the novel, this tendency to dwell in and consciously foster emotional turmoil will contribute to Marianne's near fatal illness. A common reading interprets her illness as an admonishment of letting one's emotions rule one's actions and sort of turns Austen's social satire into kind of a morality play. But I think that an interpretation more in line with Austen's subversive social commentary would have to take into account the restrictions placed on Marianne as a teenage girl by her society. Her sister Eleanor often functions as the mouthpiece of these societal expectations, and she warns Marianne not to blatantly show her emotions for the world to see, while her expressions sometimes go beyond improper to downright rude. She is, in fact, 16 years old for most of the novel, which is, for perspective, only a year older than Lydia Bennet. I think it's ungenerous to read Marianne's illness as a punishment for her bad behavior when she doesn't do or say anything too far off from what we might expect of any ordinary teenage girl today. Instead, I think we can read her illness similarly to the ultra violent, fantastical fight scenes in Polite Society as an external expression of Marianne's inner emotional pain. Rather than framing Marianne's social improprieties as moral failings, a subversive reading would frame them as her way of rebelling against the rigid expectations of her society. As Paula Byrne points out in The Genius of Jane Austen, at certain points, when Eleanor leans too far into social propriety at the expense of honesty, Byrne says the authorial sympathy shifts to Marianne. Marianne's outright refusal to participate in this form of social hypocrisy is revealed in an admirable light. Her illness results then on a metaphorical level from the pressures of society to subdue her emotions or even lie about how she's really feeling, in her view, when her internal emotional state has reached such abysmal depths that such composure is no longer sustainable. And similarly, throughout Polite Society, we as the audience are always on Ria's side, even in moments when she seems to be letting her imagination run away with her. that her suspicions about Salim and his mother's intentions toward Lena, that she suspects that their intentions are nefarious. And the fact that that turns out to be true further solidifies her as our sympathetic protagonist and validates her struggles and concerns as a teenage girl. And it's this validation of women's emotions and thoughts and desires and agency in a world that is intrinsically opposed to them that threads all of these works together. When Elizabeth Bennet asserts her own agency to Lady Catherine, a character that we can read as symbolic of the restrictions of Regency society, by refusing to promise not to marry Mr. Darcy, which at this point in the story she doesn't even think is a real possibility, Lady Catherine calls her an obstinate, headstrong girl. And this is a moniker that I'm sure any of Austen's heroines, as well as Barbie, Ariel, Rhea, and even Nida Manzoor and Greta Gerwig, perhaps even Hans Christian Andersen and Jane Austen herself, would all bear proudly, especially Depression Barbie. So, thanks for joining me. These are the works that were discussed and works that I cited. I'll include a full list in the description. And here are some places where you can find me. I am currently working on a book that is not officially being published yet, but fingers crossed. So keep an eye out for that. And then also, here's all of my socials. Again, those will be linked in the description. I also have a podcast called Pop DNA. Our most recent episode is about the color purple, and we will be heading into our regular season in September. And we'd love to have you join us. But other than that, thank you so much for joining me. Enjoy the rest of virtual JaneCon, and I'll see you sometime later, somewhere else. All right. Thanks so much.